Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. The Bigger Picture, only on Money FM 89.3.
Welcome to The Bigger Picture. I'm Emaad Akhtar. Now, flying is statistically the safest mode of transportation. But in the wake of Middle East tensions, it certainly hasn't been the most convenient one. No exact figures are available, but scores of flights were diverted away from Iranian, Iraqi, and Israeli airspace as a result of the geopolitical turmoil, which was heightened when Israel launched strikes on Iran on the 13th of June. Tensions have eased somewhat for the time being, with Iran recently resuming international flights after a 20-day suspension. So what could this mean for both the reputation and reliability of prominent Middle Eastern hubs? Well, we have on the line Shukor Yusof, founder and analyst at Endau Analytics. Shukor, good morning. How are you?
Good to speak to you, Emaad.
Yeah, nice to have you on to talk about this pertinent issue. Now, there was a pretty big drop in flights operating via key Middle Eastern air hubs, particularly Doha, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Manama since the 13th of June. First and foremost, what kind of operational impacts did this have on these hubs, and how has it affected global confidence in Gulf aviation hubs?
Well, first of all, I think when something like this happens, people should not be surprised because the commercial aviation industry has always been exposed to geopolitical vulnerabilities. So this is just one of those, and it's playing itself out. We can watch it on TV. Some of the things that the airlines based in the Middle East have done is to shut the airspace. So it created quite a bit of chaos for passengers who actually were flying towards that area when the airspace was shut. So they had to be turned back or they had to be diverted to other airspace where it requires a longer way to get to this destination. But it's not unexpected when something like this happens. Safety is paramount in this industry, and the authorities in Qatar, in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and those places are taking very serious measures to ensure the safety of passengers on their national airlines.
Yeah, I don't know if we can all recall the Qantas jet that took a 15-hour flight to nowhere due to the crisis as well. So some crazy situations have emerged from all these tensions. What this has meant is preferred air corridors and air hubs shifting to other regions. So we have the likes of Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia air corridors being favored, European hubs like Frankfurt, Istanbul, and Amsterdam, and Asian major gateways processing higher transit traffic. Do such situations present an opportunity for the countries I've just named to capitalize on Middle Eastern hubs' lack of transit traffic, or are these merely short-term beneficiaries?
Those are very interesting questions. I think those are valid points as well that you've raised. I think we have looked at the vulnerability of the Middle East for a while, and for many years, I mean, the places like Doha and Abu Dhabi and Dubai were seen to be like new mega airports coming out of those places. So a lot of people are transiting there. It's like a gateway between East and West. You stop there, move onwards towards North America, Europe, and eastwards towards China and East Asia. But now with things like this happen, you still see the relevance of places like Changi. Don't forget, I mean, Singapore remains a very safe place. Southeast Asia is relatively stable, peaceful. And so the connectivity that Changi affords, for example, for many, many decades in the past is now coming to play again. So people think, look, I mean, it's a good place to transit, to change, and the connectivity that it affords from Changi to over 150 destinations. So that's being looked into very closely by passengers, especially from Europe and other parts of the world as well. But the problem doesn't go away because aircraft has to fly over these areas, over Ukraine, over certain parts of the Middle East. So how do you circumvent that? Well, airlines have to get very creatively, so they have to reroute their planes. It's going to be very expensive, of course, but there's no way around that.
Yeah, just on that point, carriers are now being forced to adopt longer flight paths, as you said, to avoid restricted zones. As a result, they will incur higher fuel consumption costs. There will be extended crew duty hours, increased operational costs, and these burdens come on top of complicated crew scheduling and stretched operational resilience, a loss in customer demand. So what are some of the medium to longer term impacts of these cost rises to airlines?
Airlines have always been, like I said earlier, been faced with all these difficulties in the marketplace. So the operational challenges when something like this happens is for airlines to quickly review their routes and look at the alternate areas where they can fly over. But at the same time, they also have to understand the rising cost of fuel, because they're flying longer, they're flying into different places, and so they have to make alternatives on that. And the flight duration, the scheduling of their staff and all that will be impacted as well. So the cost is immense. And so, we look at 20 days or whatever that was shut down, and that's considerably minor, so to speak. But, today's world, it's very unstable, very uncertain. There could be yet other conflicts arising. We don't know yet, but it doesn't look very good, does it? So airlines are preparing for that. So a great deal of time spent by management is looking at geopolitics these days and the price of oil.
Against the backdrop of what you've seen and based on other voices on the ground who have expressed their concerns, how are Gulf carriers like Emirates, Qatar Airways, Etihad managing public perception in the wake of these disruptions?
I think they've done extremely well. These are world-class carriers, and they've consistently in the top 3 voted by passengers in the past 10 years. But you can't change the place where you're located at. So if you're in the Middle East, you're stuck with that. You have to make the best of it. But they have done relatively well to reassure their passengers and to compensate them when they were faced with those difficulties during that period when the airspace was shut. But at the same time, it exposes them. And now the reality is that people can see. Not a relatively safe place to be in to begin with when things start to fly. Missiles, So what do you do? Do you avoid that? Well, we'll see. It's a very important part of the aviation marketplace in Qatar, in the UAE, and other parts of it. Riyadh in Saudi Arabia is coming out very strongly as well in commercial aviation. But when we have all this, it brings to mind, the difficulty of having a commercial airline in a place that's very unstable. So, passengers need to take that into consideration when they're flying.
Yeah, so do you foresee any changes to growth ambitions for Gulf carriers, let's say in the next 12 to 24 months?
I think that's already being factored into their strategic management, their plans. But at the same time, I think we don't know what's coming up in 12 months. We don't know what's coming up in 12 days to begin with.
That's true.
So the reality is that they'll have to look at things very, very strategically, very, very directly. And the reality is that the Middle East has become a more unsafe place after what we've seen in the past month. And so there will be a lot more dependence on airlines that are located away from the Middle East, like I said, airlines in Southeast Asia, for example. But at the same time, we need to remind ourselves that airlines from Southeast Asia, whenever they're flying to Europe, they need to cross over a large swathe of airspace that's over the Middle East and over Ukraine. And that's been taken into account before. People would still recovering from what's happening over Ukraine, but now they have to deal with the Middle East. So it's a double whammy for many airlines in Southeast Asia. And that's going to incur losses. The bottom line is going to be affected for sure. But the airline business is very resilient. They have managed to overcome many, many difficulties like COVID, for instance. So I have no doubt that they will manage to be creative and get around that. But it's increasingly become more dangerous world.
It has indeed. We never know what's around the corner. Finally, Shukor, what would it take for Gulf aviation hubs to regain their shine? Or is it premature to even suggest that they've lost their shine?
Well, one of the things they have that very few other airlines have in the world is very deep pockets, and they have huge resources. You look at Qatar, you look at Emirates and what they can do. Very few airlines are able to do that because, other airlines are not driven by oil money. But at the same time, like I said, it's a double-edged sword being located in a geographically very interesting, very useful place. But when something like this happens, it cuts both ways. So what they can do, of course, is to improve safety, improve the products on board, and introduce more destinations, perhaps. But at the same time, airlines can also play a role by speaking to governments. Government-to-government relations are very important in the commercial aviation business to ensure that they know what's going to happen and how to mitigate the risk. So this is something new to the airlines, and airlines need to pay more attention to the risk management of geopolitics. I think that has been ignored for a bit with many airlines. So this is a new challenge that they have to face. But at the same time, I think they're up to it, especially the Gulf carriers who are managed by very, very good people.
Yeah, as you rightly pointed out, the aviation sector in the Middle East is quite resilient. Let's see if that resilience can hold firm in the face of potentially continued tensions and headwinds in the form of geopolitical turmoil. We've been in conversation with Shukor Yusof, founder and analyst at Endau Analytics. Shukor, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
Stay with Money FM 89.3.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.